Hello, I'm Seth Simmons, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 10 of Opt Out. Opt Out is a show where I sit down with passionate people to learn why privacy matters to them, the tools and techniques they've found and leveraged, and where we encourage and inspire others towards personal privacy and data sovereignty. Wondering what it's like to take the dive and switch to Linux and CalyxOS at once? Or how does the recent push for vaccine mandates impact our journey towards privacy? This episode, we're going to sit down with Chris Blec to chat about his journey to Linux and CalyxOS, security and privacy in cryptocurrency, our thoughts on the privacy implications of vaccine mandates, and much more. Welcome on Opt Out, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Seth.
It's great to finally be able to sit down and talk directly. I know we've had some back and forth on Twitter over it's been a while that I've been following you, and we've been kind of in similar circles. But just wanted to say I really respect your approach and attitude towards privacy and security in general, and just your willingness to boldly call out scams, security risks, privacy gotchas, lots of different things in the cryptocurrency space. So I'm really thrilled that you're taking a deeper dive into privacy as a general topic lately. But for those listeners who may not be familiar with you, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me on, because a lot of what I've been doing lately, which we'll talk about, was inspired by your podcast. And especially by the first episode, I think it was the first one you did with the gentleman from Techlore. Yeah, which introduced me to his channel, which really got me down a road where I realized I needed to make some drastic changes fast. And so, but we can talk about that in a minute. So, but myself, I currently, most of the day I'm spending on a project called DeFi Watch, which is sort of like a watchdog type. It's an informal, I would say, watchdog effort over DeFi, and really approaching DeFi with a trustless, decentralized attitude. And I use Bitcoin as the benchmark for pretty much the most decentralized thing we know, and I apply that to DeFi, mostly on Ethereum, but now on layer 2s as well. And when you apply that level of standard to what's going on with DeFi, most of DeFi sort of falls way short on what you would expect. And not only do they fall way short, but they're not being transparent, about those shortcomings. So that's really what my focus has been lately, and it's really been around exposing those facts to users of these protocols, because whether they're putting in $5 or $500,000 or $5 million, I've talked to people on every level that I just mentioned, and a lot of them just don't know what they don't know about the protocols that they're using. So I've been focused on that. But before all that, I was always into Bitcoin for years, Monero, and prior to that, a libertarian for most of my life, and really constitutionalist American, sort of focused in on the liberty aspect of politics. So, and I worked in marketing for a long time too, but that's the boring stuff.
Yeah, and by DeFi, for anybody, or DeFi, sorry, I think someone told me that I say that wrong. By DeFi, you're talking about the quote unquote decentralized finance projects that are being built on cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, on blockchains like Ethereum, and those tools that can be used for lots of different things. But like you said, they mostly claim to be decentralized. Not all are. So I know you've done a ton of work with breaking down what that means for really the most common projects to give people the info they need.
Yeah. And I, like I said, I've always been sort of a liberty oriented person. Bitcoin really appealed to me for that reason, as did Monero, and it still does. And when I saw this stuff developing on Ethereum, I started to think, oh, now we have a decentralized services, or a set of decentralized services we can use with our already decentralized cryptocurrency. But, over the past year or two, as I've been studying it, I realized it wasn't as decentralized as we all thought it was in the beginning. So it was really about, like I said, educating users and making sure that people like like myself and like you and others who really value decentralization, trustlessness, and also privacy, making sure that users that value those things know that they're not getting a lot of that with the DeFi applications on Ethereum. And also in the process, hopefully encouraging developers to consider these principles more when they're building and developing these smart contracts. That's been, and I've had a lot of young developers reach out to me and ask, what can we do to get better at this and to take these things into consideration? But most of the stuff that's really successful right now is coming from, is being funded from Silicon Valley. The same sort of money that's flowed into big tech for years. So I don't have super high hopes for the largest movers in that space. But and people get confused why I would talk about DeFi on Ethereum and also Liberty and also what I think about lockdowns and vaccine mandates. Like they say, why don't you should, people are so used to people focusing in on one thing on Twitter. From my point of view, it's all connected. It's all liberty. It's all related to privacy. It's all related to self-sovereignty. So to me, I just can't separate these things out. So that's where I've been focusing, though.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's privacy in particular is not something you can just kind of separate and be like, oh, like I focus on privacy, but I don't really care about any other like approaches to freedom or even political views or like you said, libertarian views. Privacy is not something that you can separate from everyday life because it's a vital, essential, central part to everything that we do, whether or not you choose to do things in a private way or a public way, or don't worry about that. Privacy is something that ties in and interlocks into every facet of life. And I'm curious what it was that woke you up to the need for personal privacy.
Well, I guess what woke me up was, and I'm sure this is an answer you would hear a lot, but it was Snowden, coming out and exposing Prism and exposing, it's interesting how things work in life, right? Where there are things you see and in the back of your mind, you think, that's weird, or, it's almost like the Matrix in a way where, you see glimpses of this or that, but you never put it all together until you have that magic moment where it all coalesces. And that could be triggered by one person, or it could be triggered by something you read, or like when I had that magic moment with Bitcoin, it was after watching an online course about the history of money. And then I just had this aha moment. But when Snowden really started revealing stuff through Glenn Greenwald and The Guardian and everything, and I'm reading, I said, wow, it just struck me exactly what the level and the depth of what he was putting out there. And at first it was hard to believe. I was like, of course this is happening. Of course this is happening. We should have known this was happening before he said anything about it.
Yeah.
And that's what really woke me up to really the dangers of big government plus big tech, and living in a world where governments feel like they have the authority to sort of commandeer information from anywhere they can get it, and the abuses of power, the sort of circumvention of the Bill of Rights, and ignoring the Fourth Amendment, or saying it doesn't apply to digital information in the same way it applies to your papers in your filing cabinet and stuff like that. So that was the moment it really woke me up, that we needed to focus on this, not just as a, because before that I was a big supporter of like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and other projects that were really focused on, on digital rights and human rights online and stuff like that. But this was the moment where it became a true liberty issue for me, and a big government overreach issue. So that was really the magic moment for me, where I realized I needed to do more.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, the key thing with that for me and for a lot of people was that it just kind of showed the scope and confirmed suspicions that a lot of people had in such a blatant way, and showed how the US government had just absolutely been running over our freedoms and our claims to digital privacy with whatever ends they said were in mind. But it definitely was something where once you see that scope and you see the tools available and you see the ways that surveillance is being done and can be done, it's certainly hard not to wake up after really seeing and digesting that kind of information. What is it about privacy that makes it such an important topic to you today?
It's well, since Snowden put the information out into the world, about what was going on, it was also sort of a moment where we realized that the government was not on our side with regards to privacy. And we already knew they weren't on our side with regards to liberty in general, especially since 9/11, which is now 20 years ago. And when was the Snowden release? Was that, I don't remember what year that was. I don't know
think
if
it was
10 years
2013. So
Okay, so about
8 years ago now.
8 years ago. Wow. So, but at that moment, it sort of made it very clear that the government didn't have our best interests at heart when it came to digital privacy, and didn't they weren't looking out for us. They were looking out for what they called national interests, which, how that goes usually. So, and then after that, when Snowden became villainized, and to this day, he's villainized. To this day, I think if you took a vote in the US now at this point, he would be considered still an outlaw, in a negative light. I mean, Donald Trump, when he's president, wanted to execute the guy, right? So it's like, so with all that going on, and with the loss of the value of privacy for so many people, not just Americans, but people around the world, and this attitude of, if you have nothing to hide, what are you worried about? Which is only growing. It's not going down, it's going up from my point of view. And so I think that we, as the people who understand why privacy matters and why you want it there when you need it, you want those tools there, not when when you don't need it, it's not as valuable to you. But when you need it, you're going to be really glad it's there. So, and this could be this generation, next generation, it might be 2 generations away where that actually happens, especially for Americans. But that's how I consider this right now. A lot of what we're doing, I mean, some of it does matter today, as we'll talk about. There are situations where people are being singled out because of things they've done online, or things they've said, or things they've put out into the world, or things they've done on their phone. It's a small, that's not happening a lot today, but it is happening. But I do think that Orwell was right, and I think we're heading in that direction where monitoring is going to be 24/7, and there's going to be a real need for privacy. And I want the next generation to have the tools. So I want to support those tools the best way that I can, as a non-developer, as like a regular person. So that's how I look at privacy today, and why I want to engage in it myself. I want to protect those rights.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's something that we talk about a lot on Opt Out, is just that idea that maybe you're in a country right now where you don't feel the need for privacy. Like, you don't feel that it's an immediate need that could be life or death, or could be the difference between having a job that you want or not having a job, or that kind of thing. But the key to me, like you mentioned, is making sure both that the tools that we do need in those scenarios are around, that they're well built, that they're well tested, and making sure that as many people as possible understand how to use those tools, understand why they should use those tools. So that if something like that happens, it's not everyone scrambling and trying to figure out what in the world to do now, but it's hopefully many, many people well prepared, understand the tool set, understand the things they need to do, and are ready when it does become something that could be life threatening or job threatening, or lots of different scenarios like that. And we've seen many countries over the years seem free, quickly shift over, and then many people, it's too late and they don't have access to the things they need. So really just
and the other thing, yeah, in that regard, what people constantly forget is that not just what you're doing on social media, but everything you're doing on your devices, a lot of times, if you're using the wrong device, is being stored sort of in perpetuity
Hmm.
So you could be doing stuff today, uploading it to iCloud, forget about it, and then 10 years, you might even delete it. And then 10 years later, something happens and Apple decides, okay, we're going to scan all your past iCloud data. Yeah, we didn't actually delete it, but we're going to scan it for anti-government material. We're going to scan it for anything that we consider dangerous to the United States or to Europe. It's like you have no idea. So digital lives forever. So anything you're doing digitally, unless you're an expert and you're in firm control of your data, which 99.9% of people are not, it lives forever whether you like it or not. So it's not just about, okay, I'm starting privacy now and from now on I'm perfectly safe. Everything you've done up until now is jeopardizing you as well. So every minute you wait before you engage in stronger privacy and OPSEC, you're sort of leaving that trail of breadcrumbs that could come back to haunt you in the future. That's the way I look at that as well.
Yeah, it's certainly something where for most people it's not too late, or hopefully won't be too late for a long time, but it is something where the earlier you start, the easier your life's going to be as you kind of take those steps down the privacy journey. You'll have less cleanup to do. You'll have less kind of loose ends that you have to worry about over the years, and it'll definitely be easier the sooner you get into that privacy journey, even if it's just small steps up front. But yeah, it is important that people realize the need and start as soon as possible, get community around them that can help them find tools that fit their needs, and just really start learning about how to use those things. You mentioned the typical "I have nothing to hide, so why should I care about privacy" myth. Are there any other common myths about personal privacy that you've run into?
Well, I mean, the common ones are really common. Is that one? I mean, with friends and family of mine, that's the one that always comes back. Or, when I talk about, and you probably run into this too, when you talk about the steps you're taking uh, to maintain privacy and to build up your defenses. In this day and age, when you describe these things you're doing to people who are just watching the news all day and just engaging with social media on a base level and just sort of, you know, being normal people, we sound like criminals.
Maybe a little paranoid for sure.
I mean, I've heard it before that, if you're out there, trying to use a prepaid SIM so that your phone company can't track this or that, or if you're out there using a privacy oriented operating system, or if you're using pseudonyms or disposable email addresses, etc. This is, and by the way, it's not just people, but also the government. The myth that they propagate is if you're doing this kind of stuff, you definitely have something to hide and you're probably a criminal. So it's such a challenge, I find, these days to forget about sort of convincing people to get more private like this. Just convincing them that you're not out of your mind and not engaging in some kind of illicit stuff is very challenging. And I really think that's only going to get worse, because I don't have a lot of faith in the media or in the government or in anybody who's spreading these messages to stop. It's propaganda that's designed to sabotage privacy efforts and to stop people from going down that road, to make it seem like it's a pointless endeavor. It's a very clear agenda that is out there, and they're winning because people are they just go along with whatever they're told. So it's like, again, it's like we're the small minority that get it, and we're always going to be the small minority, unfortunately, until something really drastic happens. Something could, earth shattering, that'll change everybody's perspective on government, or something like that. But until then, it's like we're the nutsos, and it's funny, like the same way a lot of people thought about preppers for a long time, right? They thought they were crazy. They thought they were lunatics. And then this lockdown situation came along, and all of a sudden everybody's a prepper. Right?
Everyone learned really
Everybody,
quickly.
yeah, everybody's locking themselves in with tons of food and toilet paper, and looking back at old videos of preppers on YouTube and saying, "Wow, I wish I had that bunker right now." It's like, if something earth shattering happens like that, with regard to privacy, it could really change things. But until then, uh, it's going to be tricky to navigate. I really do think so.
Yeah, I think two things pop out at me from what you mentioned. I think the first is there is a lot that regular people who are not criminals can learn from criminals and the things that they use, the tools they use, the approaches they take. There's a lot to be gained, and a lot of good research that can be done by seeing what they do, because whatever they're doing, whether or not it's criminal in actuality or immoral or not, whatever they're doing, they have a real serious, oftentimes life or death or freedom or prison imprisonment issue at hand, and so they know the need for their own privacy. And so it's really helpful a lot of times to look at what criminals are using, look at what persecuted political and religious minorities are using, look at what people who could even be very immoral, very evil people, look at what they're using and see the tools that they use, because they can be a good hint as to how we can protect our own privacy as well. So there's always a little bit of an interesting piece there with what criminals use. It can be a helpful research angle, but the
Okay, see, we're
yeah.
not going to make you now. You've eliminated yourself from the job of head of public relations for privacy, because this is, see, the challenge that we are going to have is convincing the world that we're not criminals. But if we go out there and say, study what criminals are, I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I also think that we're gonna keep running into the situation more and more where anybody who's doing this stuff must be a criminal, that kind of attitude. So it's like,
And that will be the push.
yes,
Yeah, that will be the push
yeah,
from governments, from authoritarian regimes. That will be the push, because they want to give people a false sense of security when they give up their privacy, because they want them to feel like, if I am a good person, I don't care about privacy and I allow my government to
right.
see everything I do. But I think there's two key things. I mean, one, that is an objectively false thing. So I hope that we're able to wake people up through that. But I think the second thing is, a lot of things have shifted in the last year and a half that I don't think I saw shifting this quickly, and a lot of people have woken up. And I think there really has been a resurgence in the privacy communities. There has been a resurgence in the real freedom movements around at least the US and many parts of the world, because they've seen clear, blatant pushes against our freedoms in other ways. And so when they see pushback on freedoms that they hold near and dear, they realize the need for privacy at that point. So I think we have seen a lot of people shift and wake up, but that will only make the mainstream media and government approach even stronger against those privacy tools and against those people, to try to make it seem as if they are things that only criminals would use, or only people who are doing bad things would use.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's only going to get stronger, and it's going to be probably the most important battle of our lifetimes. I think. I think that the complete loss of privacy is the sort of the last frontier, for authoritarianism to just settle in and have full control. And unfortunately, a lot of blockchain-based technologies are going to contribute to that and make it easy for that loss of privacy to happen. I think people don't recognize that fully yet. I think Bitcoin is a great, amazing innovation that's changing the world for the better, as far as solving problems that we had, creating this form of money government can't control. They can't control the economics of. But at the same time, it's privacy with Bitcoin, and the combination of that regulation on the end is creating a pair, right? And there's other digital tech being created as a result of Bitcoin's invention, like technology, that people are looking at saying, okay, a lot of good points. It's built on blockchain. It gives people the ability to own their. We don't have Google and Twitter else with logins in our decentralized identity wallet and control it ourselves. But at the same time, there's a really dark side to the whole thing that nobody's talking about yet, and that's that technology is going to make it much, much easier to get rules as they come up. Vaccine passport is a great example. If decentralized blockchain identity right now, it would be simple for a vaccine passport instantly, and require you to have so it's a double-edged sword, and we're in the process of creating a lot of tech that's going to in the near future.
Yeah, let's go ahead and let's get a little controversial and chat about the privacy implications of things like vaccine passports. I know it's something that you've been vocal about on Twitter. I've talked some about, but it hasn't been a huge focus for me, but it's definitely something that's just becoming more important in my mind, as we've seen these really, in my opinion, authoritarian pushes towards a restriction of freedom for those who don't choose to take a vaccine, which is definitely it's a hot topic and it's highly politicized. But what is it that makes that topic so important for you today?
Again, it comes down to privacy. It's about what information about yourself, about your medical history, about your medical decisions, be required by force of government to disclose to the government, to others, just to participate in daily life. I mean, it sounds crazy that, if you just 5 years from now, you're not going to market without revealing personal medical information to a door checker at the door who's going to verify your personal medical information on your phone or on a card. You'll be required to and if you don't have this card, if you're able to enter the supermarket to buy, we said that 5 years ago without pandemics, it would have sounded right. But now again, like, this is a privacy podcast. If you're listening to this, you respect privacy, you value privacy. This is a privacy issue. There is no other kind of issue at hand here other than privacy. It's getting really mishmashed with a lot of different things, with with the medical aspects, with the social aspects, and the same argument is being, if you're getting vaccinated, that's the same argument. But it's not about the vaccine, and it's not about if you're a good person or not. It's about, do you have the right to keep your medical information private? And if you believe so, then you're on the side of private. You would be against a vaccine passport law or regulation that's in violence, which means every law is enforced with guns in a cage, right? It's like, if you don't comply with the vaccine passport laws, you will be thrown in a cage. We're already seeing it in Australia. We're seeing it in other places that used to, a couple of years ago, were bastions of freedom, and now it's a complete disaster. So to me, it's a complete issue. I think there's human rights issues as well with regard to forced medical procedures, but that might be outside the scope of this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky topic because it's so heavily weaponized by politicians, by the government, by governments across the world, and it's been turned into something that's a much more divisive issue than I think it needs to be. I really think, even whether you're for the COVID vaccine, against the COVID vaccine, whatever your views are on the actual medical data, the actual scientific data, the actual research that's being done, whatever your views are on how well the vaccine works or what it does, people, in my opinion, should be able to come together around the idea that access to the economy, access to a livelihood, access to food, clothing, shelter, all of those things should not be gated by confidential medical information. You should not have to give up a thing that tells someone your personal information and your vaccination status to be able to, like you said, go into a grocery store or to retain a job, like we've seen. I mean, we're recording this on the day that New York fired 80,000 healthcare workers. Many hundreds of healthcare workers got fired near me as well because they either chose not to get vaccinated or chose not to disclose their vaccination status. And that is someone losing their livelihood over, again, private medical information. And in particular, in a vaccine that's not been shown to prevent spread. So they're not putting other people at risk by not getting vaccinated. So it really becomes a compliance issue and a privacy issue. And it's something that can be really tricky to have good conversations on the privacy aspects. And it's something that I kind of got into a lot of hot water when I was going to DEF CON and trying to get in, and they made vaccine passports mandatory, which was a very interesting approach for a supposedly kind of countercultural, privacy-centric conference. They also switched to mostly credit card acceptance rather than cash. But their argument was initially to me was, well, you don't have an expectation of privacy in Vegas, so you shouldn't expect privacy when you come to the conference. So they were requiring that, even though that wasn't even a state mandate or a federal mandate in any way at that point. And it was just, to me, it was a sign that people are willing to give up privacy when they feel that it gives them some sort of security. And they're even willing when they're a pro-privacy community in general. So it's something that the government knows, and honestly, big tech knows the buttons that they can push to get us to comply in different ways. And if they can find the right buttons to push to get us to comply and give away our privacy without them having to forcefully remove our privacy, they're going to push those buttons. And vaccine passports can be a very strong button to push because people are fearful of COVID, people are fearful of the vaccines, people are fearful of the government, and they can use that fear to try to strip away privacy along the way. So whatever your views on the vaccine are, I hope that people can really come together on the idea of vaccine passports being something that, when mandating access to the economy and access to a livelihood through a vaccination passport and through giving up that confidential medical information to do all of these things, hopefully that's something we can come together on the topic of privacy about.
Yeah. I mean, there's really two issues that people are overlooking in a very unfortunate and sometimes hypocritical way. And one is the laws happening right now that are not longer term consequences in the way it could come back to affect them in the future. You know, if there is a political regime, you know, in whatever country they're in that they disagree with, that is prioritizing something that they completely disagree, and is demanding that they expose something about themselves that they don't feel like they need to, but the government says they do need to. You know, so this could be flipped around very quickly. And then the other side of this is the bodily autonomy, you know, part where for how many decades have we, my body, my choice, right? It's my body. I can what to it. I can decide what to it. I can decide, in certain cases, what comes out of it. Not after talk, you know what I mean? So, you know, it's, you know, the same people who are chanting that for decades are now demanding that you put a needle in your arm and you're injected with something that you don't necessarily want in your body. You know, it opens up this Pandora's box that, I directly privacy. I mean, much more than your skin and your body, like being forced to have a needle push. Like privacy it doesn't get any deeper than that. So, I think that it's people are going to figure this out way too late. And we saw the same exact thing. I know I'm way older than you, but on 9/11, 2001, I was in my mid 20s. And so I experienced all that. And I experienced the couple years after that where everybody was still in this delusional mindset of, we have to kill the terrorists, we have to go after them, we have to do, full national support, we support the government, whatever you got to do, you got to do. Oh, you're killing civilians, well, it's in the name of justice and all that. Patriot Act, everything that went down. I mean, if you look back now and you realize the damage the Patriot Act, and you think to yourself, how in the world did a living country like America let that thing just happen?
Mm-hmm.
And because there was that sort of mass delusion, came with the trauma of just having your world shaken, by that event. And the recent pandemic, I wouldn't put it on the same playing field as far as like a one day sort of traumatic event. It was traumatic over a much longer period.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are in their state where we just have to do whatever we can do right now, regardless of the costs of future generations, and it's a sad because it really us as much as it's going to hurt the next 1 to 5 generations, that come along and have to deal with.
Yeah. These things have very far-reaching consequences, and a key thing that you've mentioned already today, it's just that once you give those things up, once you give up those freedoms, once you allow the government to take a step into your private life and a step into taking away liberties, good luck getting it back. It only gets harder and harder when privacy is undermined. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people think about, is that they may hold many different liberties that they have very dearly, but they're not concerned with privacy. And they don't realize that when they have no privacy, there's no way for them to deter or push back against a government that wants to tread on those other liberties that they hold so dear. So it's something that goes hand in hand. So if we're willing to give up that privacy for a specific fear of today, even if that is a legitimate fear, and obviously people have died from COVID, there has been loss. If we let that fear cloud our judgment and cloud our vision and allow us to give up vital pieces of our privacy and vital pieces of our digital and physical life today, we're going to pay the consequences down the road. That's something that a lot of people don't consider, but is really, really important.
Right. And we're still not having the right debate in society. The debate should be at what point is it to begin to remove people's liberty, remove their privacy, keeping others, like at what level of danger, at what level of risk should every human to accept for? And what level, so when you choose that level, you're saying, okay, anybody who impedes anybody causes more to lose their liberty and deserves to lose their privacy and deserves to lose their bodily autonomy, decided for us. Okay, that level was decided for us, and it was decided that if you pose any potential risk of spreading this virus, that you deserve to lose your societal privileges. And but the debate never happened. It was fiat. It was tyranny. In this case, I don't know if it's the majority with the government and their constituents. So, but that's the debate that should be having. And I do think that, look, if you enter a wartime situation, if your country is invaded, if you are facing the Black Death, people are dying in the streets, if you're, there's definitely certain situations where they're life or death, and you would expect to lose some of your liberty. are other situations like the one that's currently occurring where you would not expect it would reach that level. Just the science and the statistics, and you're seeing, the minimal risk that's posed to so many different age groups, and debate hasn't happened. We just decided that's the line, and but that's really where we need to get to. And I do think we're going to get there in the next half a decade, I hope. That delusional phase where it's just, full steam ahead on crushing the enemy, and it's unfortunate, but we get, we're going to be, we're still taking we have no idea why we're doing that.
Yeah. I hope that it is not too much longer before we're able to take a good retrospective look and see what was done that shouldn't have been done and what wasn't done that should have been done. Hopefully that is something that enough people wake up to and push back on, so that we're able to have those legitimate, uncensored, open air discussions where we're able to actually come to an agreement together as a people, as countries, and make those decisions for ourselves, like you said.
Let's put it this way, though. It's like, if we're still taking off our shoes 20 years later, how long is it going to take until we get out of in vaccine cards or a way of life? It's like, that's what worries me. It's like, once the government starts down that path, we don't have a good track record. Actually, I don't believe there's any precedent in world history for a government willingly giving up power that it's grabbed. So
yeah,
this is why, again, to bring it back, like the privacy tech that's being built, whether it's blockchain based or not, these other open source projects that are out there that, like Calyx and privacy you can get by switching off from Mac and Windows into Linux and stuff like that. This is the way forward, and Bitcoin, for instance, if the government had figured out Bitcoin sooner and saw it was coming, they would have found a way to shut it down. They couldn't, because by the time they figured it out, it was way too big. It was a global economy. It's everywhere. You can't stop it. And as soon as they realized they couldn't stop it, then they embraced it. They tried to figure out, okay, how can we work with this instead of trying to crush it? And that's where privacy tech needs to get to, right? It needs to get to the point where it's just too big to be stopped, too big to fail. And that's the only way to sort of reverse, I think, what we're seeing right now.
Let's take a quick break from this episode to chat about the sponsors of Opt-out, Cake Wallet and Local Monero. Cake Wallet is a key tool that I use daily, as it allows me to easily and quickly use Monero for private by default payments. It's available on both iOS and Android, and is a fantastic way to get started buying and using Monero with a simple and easy to understand user experience. I regularly onboard new users to Cake Wallet and hope that it will help simplify and ease your journey into cryptocurrency. If you're interested in purchasing Monero for the first time, or helping to bring others into a parallel economy, I'd recommend you look at using Local Monero, like I do, to buy and sell Monero while maintaining your privacy and avoiding invasive exchange surveillance. Local Monero is entirely peer-to-peer and is an important part of opting out of the surveillance state and into a parallel economy. Thank you to both sponsors for their incredible support and partnership, and I hope you'll take a moment after the episode to learn more in the show notes or at optoutpod.com/sponsors. Yes, I know you've been taking a lot of those steps yourself, and you mentioned Linux right there. I'm curious. I know you've been trying to switch to Linux as a daily driver. What was it that made you finally make the switch? And then what have been kind of the bright spots and the pain points of you? Because that's something we've talked about a good bit on Opt-out. That's something that I've done over the past, I guess, couple of years, switched to Linux, first Debian and now Pop! OS as my daily drivers. But it can be something that can be very daunting for people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you made the jump, and then what have been the pros and the cons for you so far.
Well, after I heard your episode with Henry, and then the Apple CSAM boondoggle happened.
Yeah.
That was really a trigger point for me in realizing, okay, sort of hesitant to believe Apple's promises that they were making, and saw it as just heavy marketing. You see billboards everywhere with privacy, privacy, privacy. And the next thing you know, they're saying they're going to scan all your photos and review them with humans if needed. It's like, what an unbelievable about face. And I know they never went through with it. They postponed it. They say that they're going to work harder on preserving privacy when they do it, not if it. But that was really a trigger point for me in realizing between that and like when I heard about that tech, I mean, obviously everybody wants to protect children, right? But this is happening at the same time as government is calling people who disagree with it on any level about things that it's doing. It's calling them domestic terrorists at this point. Just for, sort of, you got people like AOC and them like saying, if you disagree with this or that, you're basically a terrorist, and trying to make lists of people who they think are dangerous to society and things like that. And it includes, you look at some of the documents that are floating around DC, libertarians are literally now on a list of potential problem groups for national security, which is insane when you think about it. But it's like, how long is it going to be before big tech is sort of scanning for, information or pictures or notes or text messages sort of fit that bill, and you might never know it and they might never tell us they're doing it. But next thing you know, there's a list being created, and there's really no reason at this point to think that's not going to happen. We've seen already big tech buy into sort of shutting down any conversation about vaccines and about the virus and things like that, to the point where, fully credentialed scientists and doctors that have that are just completely eliminated from YouTube and Twitter just because they said something that didn't line up with the government. So why wouldn't the government? I mean, why wouldn't the big tech agree to monitor for certain types of things? So when I started thinking about that, and then CSAM happened and everything, I said, you know what? It's time to take a step out of this. I've given up too much of my privacy in exchange for convenience. And that's really what it boiled down to. It's, you live in that Apple world, and I was probably there for, a good, I think I got an iPhone in 2009, and then after that, so, 12 years, and 12 years in that ecosystem is like, you get very comfortable. I don't know if you're a Mac guy or have been in the past, but
off and on, but not regularly through the years.
Okay. Into that ecosystem and you're just in, you got the iPad, you got the, and it's like you get too used to things being really, really easy. And that's their objective, right? Is to keep you in the ecosystem and sort of lock you in mentally. And, in doing that, you don't realize at first, but eventually you realize you're giving up so much information to one company, and you then CSAM happens and you're like, wow, this is a huge liability. And it's actually could cost you everything if things go the wrong way, so that was really the spark that I needed to the iPhone, figure out a different way to work and then ditch Mac OS, which was more recent for me, and try to, sort of embrace the quirkiness of hasn't been easy. I actually, I DM'd you a week or two ago and said, I don't know if I can do this, man. It's like, things aren't working. Like, I'm so used to my Mac just working. But since then, I do have good news in that I figured a bunch of things out, and I'm on my Linux computer right now talking to you.
Nice.
Things are going pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. It's not always an easy thing. And there's a lot of, especially when you're in a walled ecosystem like that. I mean, like, walled gardens are Apple's specialty. There's similar things in like the Android space and kind of in Windows, but they don't have as much of a monopoly on that. But when you're in a walled garden like that, it is very intentionally very difficult to escape, like you mentioned. So just making that conscious effort to start exploring outside that walled garden is such an important step forward. And I'm glad that you've been able to make some strides into making it work for you. But I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it, because I don't want people to get the idea that everything that they do, every step they take on their privacy journey is going to be an easy thing, or is going to be like, oh yeah, I just switched. It was no big deal. That's not really how it is for a lot of people. So I think it's good to hear the pros and the cons that people have when they're taking these steps, so that you can understand what you're getting into, be aware of the things that you need to learn about, maybe a Linux distribution that's better for you or worse for you. And that's one of the reasons why I did really want to chat about that. And I'm curious what Linux distribution you settled on, if you don't mind sharing.
I settled on Zorin. Zorin, which I've tried a bunch, and for some reason this one just clicked with me. I'm not sure if it has to do with the desktop. It seemed to work nicely with the laptop I got, and so I've been sticking with for now.
Nice. Yeah, I've heard that it's a pretty user friendly one. The one that I've settled on for now, and that I recommend to a lot of people, is Pop OS, which is made by System 76, who also have their own line of laptops, desktops, lots of different Linux first hardware. But I think that's it's the beauty and the curse, I guess, of the Linux ecosystem, is that there is a distro out there for everyone, but that means that every distro is not for everyone. So you have to kind of find the thing that fits you best. And a lot of times that just boils down to the desktop environment, whether that's something like GNOME or KDE or the different experiences that there are around that. But a lot of it can just come down to how well packaged the system is. Like Pop OS, I really enjoy. It's really easy to get the apps you need. They work really well. They have a really good tiling system for multitasking. There's a lot of stuff bundled there that fits my needs really well, but that doesn't mean it'll fit everyone's.
Yeah. It was funny because when I started on this journey, I was thinking to myself, well, if I'm going to do this, I got to go all the way. So I was thinking, I'm going to just start with Cubes. And Cubes OS, for those that don't know, is like a mega privacy Linux distro from other ones where you're running multiple virtual machines to keep your data separate and privacy oriented. But it's also, if you're not well versed with Linux, you're with command line and with just hacking your computer in general, it's kind of wild. And what I realized was, I think a lot of people probably fail for that reason, in that they try to just make too big of a jump right away. And I sort of, because I'm ashamed to move to a Linux distro that looked just like Mac, or looked just like Windows. Like I was like, oh, that's just a cop out. Like, what am I doing? I got to go full bore. So I started watching like command line videos, and I was like, I'm going to do this because I know some to Cubes. So, but at a certain point, you got to the baby steps. It's like it's a big enough jump from Mac to something like Zorin.
Exactly.
Like look easy to use. You're getting that your feet out of that ecosystem, and just that jump alone has been way hard to be, as far as like getting everything sort of. And also escaping. I'm ashamed to say I was using iCloud. And escaping iCloud, my photos, my documents, my notes, my reminders, my calendar, my everything. Just sort of, it's easy to get like something like Nextcloud set up. You can get that set up, getting everything out. I still don't have everything out of iCloud. I'm still trying to figure out how to get like 50 gigs of like data out. It's like up, and it's like they don't make it easy. But my who's thinking about doing this is expect it to be. It's not an overnight thing. For me, it is literally. It's a months long process. It is. It's just figuring out the right hardware, the right Linux distro. migrating all that data over, just getting yourself to the point where you're up and running and feel sufficient. For it's taking a couple months. And I think it's important not to rush it, because I think if you rush it and then you fail, I think that's where you just almost did. I almost gave up a couple weeks ago. I was like, I'm going back to Mac. Forget this. This is not worth it. But then I realized if I go back, I'm back there again with the same problems, the same privacy issues. And it's even worse now because I've had a failure, and I feel like it'll take me another couple of years to get the balls to try it again. So I was like, I got to keep pushing at this. I got to just see if I can make it happen. And it's happening now. I'm feeling better. And I think probably in another couple of weeks, I'll be able to completely ditch my MacBook and feel good about things.
It's awesome to hear that you've been able to push through the difficulties there and just get over that initial hurdle. I mean, I think you hit on a few really good points there. The first being, don't feel like you have to go like cold turkey, all in, hardcore CLI only Linux. Like you don't need to go all the way necessarily. I mean, maybe you have a threat model where Mac OS and normal distros are just not a possibility. You need to jump to something straight and like cubes. Like that could be something that's a valid approach for you. But for most people, that's not the thing at hand. They need to take it slow, figure out a distribution that works for you, figure out the tools that you can migrate to, and just really start to get your feet wet, start to get familiar. And for a lot of people, if you can, keep both at first. Like you're switching from Mac OS to Linux. Unless you have to go cold turkey, I'd recommend most people slowly transition, realize what are the tools that I absolutely have to have from my Mac onto Linux, and how can I find a hopefully FOSS alternative on Linux, or a way to run that in a web browser instead of an application, something like that, and just slowly make that transition. And that's the second kind of key point out of there, is transitioning from like iOS to CalyxOS or Mac OS to Linux. A lot of the complexity is not necessarily what the like day-to-day desktop environment is. A lot of the complexity is the services that you've been kind of sold and settled into and used to in a walled garden like Apple's ecosystem in particular. Those things are not something you can just start using on a Linux machine or start using on CalyxOS. They're things you have to find alternatives for. And hopefully you're able to find FOSS alternatives, but that transition of not only the actual operating system you're using, but all of the tools and services that you're used to on your original operating system, that can take a really long time. And it's important that people realize like it can take a while, but it is absolutely worth it. And there are many people who've gone through the same transition who will hopefully be more than willing to help you go through the transition as well. And so that's one of the reasons why I drive the need for community home so much on Opt-out, is if you have that group of people around you who have been through that, who understand how hard it is, who understand different tools on both sides of the walled gardens and can help you do that transition, it's going to be a lot easier, because you can have those people you can reach out to and say, hey, like I'm really struggling, I don't know if I can do this, and they can kind of help guide you through, or give you tips and tricks, or just maybe give you some motivation to keep pushing through. So community is vital in making a switch like that.
Yeah, and my resources have really been you and TechLore and a bunch of other YouTube Linux distros and stuff like that. It's all out there. Like there's great information out there, but at the end of the day, you don't really know what you're in for.
Yeah.
To do it yourself. It's like you can get some guidance, but you have to just jump in and do it. And then as you go, I mean, I tried probably distros before I settled on this one. At the same time as I was also transitioning mobile, which is a whole different beast. iOS to CalyxOS, and figuring out the hardware, getting your hands on a Pixel, and then installing and then figuring out apps and figuring out up and stuff like that. So much involved, and it's so personal on so many levels. I think everybody has, like for me, one of the biggest, my biggest issue still is figuring out reminders. Believe it or not, like on the iPhone, I just was a master. I had a big list tasks, reminders, and recurring reminders, and it's it's probably been my biggest headache from moving to Calyx is like figuring out how to replicate that. And now I've gotten to a pretty good place with using
Nice.
syncing it with my laptop, and still it's still not as smooth as iOS, obviously, but it's funny how you discover the things you're most reliant on. You don't even really realize with Apple because you're so brainwashed. Everything's just so easy. But again, don't kid yourself. It is a trade-off. You've traded your privacy for convenience. So when you make this switch out to, a FOSS mobile operating system or to Linux, you are reversing that. You are giving up for your privacy back. And it's a trade-off that can go either direction, but don't kid yourself. It's not going to be as easy and seamless as you get with those centralized services that require you to give up your privacy and therefore your liberty.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a game of trade-offs, but usually giving up a little convenience for much greater privacy is a good trade-off to make. And once you spend time using those new tools, using things like Nextcloud, you get more comfortable with the approaches that they've taken to user experience, to sync, to all of those things. And it becomes more convenient over time too. So definitely don't want people to think the inconvenience they face right when they get into using Linux or CalyxOS or something like that will always be the situation, because you'll learn tools that fit your specific needs, and you'll learn how to use those tools better and better over time. So it's definitely something that does improve, but definitely don't expect it to be as seamless as when it's a completely closed walled garden ecosystem, because you simply can't make a free open source set of tools that cohesive when they're created by different people for different purposes with different goals in mind, all of that kind of thing.
Right. Not yet.
Yeah.
Who knows what the future may hold, right? I mean, I have high hopes for
it's
open
getting better
source.
and better. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked when I used these new Linux distros and like Zorin 16 and like the way it looks and the way it's just, it's very smooth and very easy to use. And I've had very, very few problems with it. And I was really surprised because last time I used Linux was, I mean, probably 10 years ago, and it was nothing like this. So it's great to see. And with CalyxOS and other open source stuff on mobile, it's the same thing. It's like you have these beautiful operating systems now where you would never expect this level of and a lot of it has to do with the hardware that's available and stuff like that now too. But in another 10 years, who knows where we're going to be? We could really figure out a way to replicate that sort of not a walled garden, of course, but a seamless, we're seeing it somewhat now, I realize, with Linux and with snaps and with Flatpaks and stuff, where there's starting to be this, and I know it's a controversial topic a little bit, but we're starting to see this streamlined way of operating, but still in an open source manner, and I think that that's really a big step towards making it easier for end users to sort of exist in this world, and not having to rely on closed source centralized systems just for that level of convenience. So it's going to be really so.
Yeah. And the beauty of these tools is the more people we pull into them, the more funding they get through donations, through grants, through other ways of funding open source projects, the more feedback that we give them and the people we pull into them give them, the more code that people jump in and decide to commit, because again, most of the stuff is free and open source, so anyone can contribute code. The bigger we grow this ecosystem and these communities, the better these tools are going to get. So it can be even a completely selfish thing. If you just want the tool to be better for yourself, you can pull people into using it, and you can pull people in to fund it and all of those kinds of things, knowing that it'll make it better for you. And that's fine, because it's going to improve these tools that are very, very important, and they are really improving rapidly. And it's something that I've been really glad to see as I've kind of jumped deeper and deeper and deeper into privacy tools for sure. I'm curious. I want to learn a little bit more about your transition to CalyxOS too, because I know you said that's been a little bit easier, but it's been going on for a while. I'm curious. Was the final nudge to switch to that also the CSAM stuff by Apple? And then kind of how has that process been for you overall?
Yeah, well, that was the initial push. Yeah, and that's why I also the decision to move to Linux was as a result So the transition, yeah, I would say that one's been just as long, probably a little longer than the Linux transition, probably because I have to first discover Calyx, which I thankfully did from you guys. Then you need to sort of get to the point where you just understand how it works. How can you have Android without Google, right? It's like, so I didn't know the full history of Android, to be honest
Yeah.
with you, before. I was like, why would I want to go back and just use more of Android? And why would I want to put it on a Google phone? It's like, I had so many questions at first.
That one gets
But
so
then
many
I
people.
sort of, yeah, and it still gets me. I still have like 1% skepticism about the whole thing. But yeah, then you got to source a phone, right? And if you do it right, you're not tying your identity to it. You're not ordering it from Google. You're trying to find a pixel that you can. So you got that step. Then you've got to figure out your mobile carrier. So you need to make changes there. And if you've been with one mobile carrier for a long time and you never use prepaid, you need to sort of learn how that all works. I mean, there's so many steps. You need to get your phone. You need to get your new prepaid to do this that way. And after that, only after all of that, which could easily take 2 to 4 weeks by itself, then you can start to set up your phone. Then you can start to figure out how open source source work, Aurora and F-Droid and what. And then Nextcloud is a whole other project. It took me forever to with that. Host it first, and because I'm a digital nomad, I just couldn't do it. I was trying to use like a Raspberry Pi and just hook it up wherever I went, but it just wasn't working out for me. So right now I'm using a hosted solution for Nextcloud, but I'm fully committed to whenever I stop being a nomad to self. But to see, and I don't know if one exists, but I think we really need. Maybe I should do it. Build like a full on user manual just from zero to Calyx. Just because I couldn't find one place to get all the information, but it is all out there if you look hard enough. There's a lot of good info out there, especially on the Calyx forums. I found a lot of good information.
Yeah, I mean the more educational content, the better. So that's something you could put together. It'd definitely be a net win. There have been some good resources that I've shared that I'll make sure to link as well. There's been a few previous guests and other blogs that have put together bits and pieces of that. But like you said, it can be hard to piece together really the whole journey, especially depending on how deep you go into using like prepaid SIM with cash, buying a phone third party and without KYC or without identity tied to it in any way. That can add a lot of complexity that a lot of guides won't cover. So definitely would be good to get that if that's something you'd be interested in putting together, or even just your thoughts on the experience is always helpful to have more people's journeys visible so people can kind of see like, okay, this was this guy's approach, this is what he went about, these are the tips he had, and it's super super helpful, if nothing else but to share your story. So that'd be great to see if you have time for that.
I should do that. There's a lot of nuance too that I didn't even realize until I was in the midst of it. Like, for instance, I decided, okay, I'm gonna, get a prepaid SIM, use a new phone number. But then I realized, there's value in not giving this phone number out to companies. You still need a phone number to give to your bank and to, places that you order from, in a lot of cases. So, I realized, if I keep my old phone number, I can port that over to a cheap flip phone or something and get a $5 a month prepaid plan with minimal minutes and stuff, and like stuff like that, like little things that occurred to me along the way that I'm finding were really good decisions, because now I don't need to give my personal number out to any organization, and because as we all know, shopping is a real thing, and attacks using your phone number are a real thing, and the more flexibility you can keep for yourself, the better, so But yeah, I think that you're right in that sharing those stories could be really valuable for people.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And is there? I know you covered a good bit of things in that section, but was there any other specific advice you'd give for someone who's wanting to transition to something like CalyxOS?
It's similar to the Linux OS. I would say you need to, especially like with me, I was hitting every road, even including like family. I got my whole family over the last Apple ecosystem, so we could all FaceTime and iMessage and stuff like that. And so all of a sudden, I'm a jerk. Moving to Android, nobody can FaceTime, message me, and get everybody to install Signal. It's like you just have to understand that not everybody's going to understand the moves you're making, but you're gonna, like, I've decided I'm still going to an Apple device around just for FaceTiming with my sister and her kids and stuff like that. Yeah. Just to keep your personal relationships going, but you can still them off when you're not using them, put them away. You're not going to use them for anything other than that purpose. So I would say be patient, baby steps. Don't be all or nothing, because this can be gradual. This long using these horrible surveillance. So if you just start to phase it out now, you're much better off than 99.9% of the people out there anyway. And as for a switch to Calyx, is that be patient with yourself and with your situation, and don't shot.
Yeah, really good advice. It's important that people start that journey. Get rolling. You'll get there, but definitely take it one step at a time.
Right.
Are there any other tools that you use regularly to opt out that you'd recommend others take a look at, and then why?
So I learned about privacy.com from one of your podcasts, I think.
I think that was episode 1 as well.
Oh, see that yeah, TechLore's great. So I've been using that. I've been sort of I've been for the past a long time a heavy credit card user, not for debt purposes, but for the old art of churning, I would say, like just earning points and like, bonus. I opened every credit card possible, and before I started to realize the privacy implications, and I'm only starting to realize the privacy implications of credit cards and, the surveillance that can happen with it. It's so easy for a bank to know everything about you, and not to mention the places you order from and places like that. But I mean, your credit card issuer has it. They need to every shop. They know, where you're buying your condoms. They know. It's like they know way too much. So, it's like easing out of that is a goal of mine. And I found that privacy.com, which lets you have these disposable credit cards, and your bank never sees what's going on. They never see the transactions because you can mask them, is a valuable tool. You still trust privacy.com, of course, is a separate thing I'm not around yet because they can see everything. But it's better. I'd rather put my trust in them than, Wells Fargo. Like if government or subpoena all credit card records for anybody who's ever had vaccines. So so I've been using as far as email goes, I did look at I think it was called Simple Login that you guys mentioned.
Yeah, I made the switch after episode 1. Super helpful.
Yeah. I for a couple of years a domain and using a catch-all address. So I already had a pretty good system going with email and I haven't. So I haven't made any big changes with that yet. But I do suggest one of those two methods for everybody. Either which might be the easier, faster way to achieve some sort of email privacy, or do what I did and set up your own domain. You can use Proton Mail or any other. There's a lot of systems you privacy. Up is a catch-all address, which means email address at your domain. Setting up for Amazon, you make it Amazon.com. It's Facebook. But that's been really helpful for me, and sort of seeing which ones are being sold to mailing lists. I do smaller companies that I'll sign up for one company, and then a year later, I'm getting just loads of spam, right, from on that address, and I can see exactly who I gave that address to. So that's been really helpful for me in identifying who I can't trust out there, and letting others know about it too. So that I try to take care of my privacy.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really good point that like privacy.com, you still have to trust them with your data. But a lot of these things where there's not a trustless alternative, like if you need to use a credit card, there's not a trustless credit card you can use where you're not giving that data to someone, at least not that I know of. So if you're going to give that data to someone, it's important that you choose wisely who is getting that data. And so yes, you're trusting that data to like privacy.com, but they also have a very good reputation. They've handled data well so far. Like there's a lot to say about when something cannot be trustless. Having options to decide who you trust with that data is really important. And trusting a company like privacy.com is, like you mentioned, generally going to be a lot better than trusting your generic bank. But everyone needs to decide like what fits their specific threat model and approach individually, for sure.
Until narrow, we're kind of stuck with credit cards and debit cards for online ordering.
Slowly but surely.
We'll get
awesome.
there.
Well, last question I have for you, man, is what advice would you give to someone who's just starting to realize the need for personal privacy?
I would say Snowden's book, which excellent sort of expose, starting to realize the need for it. Then that after you read that, you'll be in panic mode. Like you'll realize what you're dealing with, as far as big tech and digital surveillance and things like that.
That was what did it for me. That's called Permanent Record by Edward Snowden, right, for anyone who's not aware.
Yeah. I mean, I think just consuming that knowledge that's already out there, making sure you're sticking to reputable sources, or as reputable as you can find. I think this is a great way to stay tuned to that kind of stuff. And the more that you consume and the more that you realize the threats that you face, the quicker you're going to decide to take some sort of action, and I think that, again, it's like it could take you, people, they might wake up and decide, okay, make guidance. It depends where you're at. Like, this has been building for me for since 9/11, like where
Wow.
I mean, I realized when, Patriot Act was first being talked about, I remember it doesn't seem right. Like, we're giving up what? It's like, I realized like, wow, like we're overreacting, and like then 20 years later, I finally decide to take action. So it's like, I mean, there was a lot of steps with up and things like that, but just go on your own timeline. That you're everybody's a unique person who has different needs and different wants to get different things out of life. And if you feel passionate about this, then jump in with both feet. But if you feel like information before you take action, but at the end of the day, like we said in the beginning, I think what you realize, especially after reading Snowden's book, is every day that you wait is another day of data that's being collected on you, and if you don't take some, you're just continuing to sort of feed the beast, and but that becomes apparent the more that you learn and you get info from good sources and realize the perspective that's shared by the mainstream especially is generally incorrect when it comes to liberty perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately true, but I'm thankful that there are so many good resources out there. Like you mentioned, TechLore has been a huge one for me, and definitely recommend people look at the work that they've done. But there are lots of great resources out there. Hopefully, a lot of the episodes of this podcast will be that resource for people or point people in the right direction. But there is a lot out there. If you choose to look and dig, you're gonna find great stuff out there. And if you along the way find a gap, fill it in. Hopefully, people will come out with their own content, come out with their own blog posts, their own videos, their own podcasts to help fill in those gaps. But thank you so much for coming on, Chris. It was a great chance to get to chat, and I'm glad we were able to finally talk directly and just to cover some really important topics here today. I know we didn't get a ton into cryptocurrencies, but I do want to have you back on in the future, and we'll chat a little bit more about that for sure, and chat about more of your work in DeFi. Gosh, I'm never going to say it correctly.
I don't even know if I'm saying it right.
I've been told it's
Thanks
DeFi.
for inviting me. It's DeFi, but this is the most common pronunciation. But thanks for having me, and it was cool to come on episodes that sort of inspired me to take action and then go back out of the work.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear the journey that you've been going through, and I love that listeners will get to see kind of a glimpse into what it looks like to realize that need and jump into those steps to take back your privacy. For listeners who want to read more about what you do or communicate with you, what's the best way to keep up with you or reach out?
On Twitter, first and foremost, at Chris BHRISBLEC, and DeFiWatch.net is where I share information about DeFi as it comes up. And I also have a podcast, Proof of Decentralization, that you can find out there in the world. But Twitter is where I put all that stuff first.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again for coming on, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Seth.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Opt Out. If you did, please take a moment and subscribe to the podcast, or if you're already subscribed, share it with one friend or family member this week. As always, you can check out the links to our guest content and contact info, as well as links to all of the tools we discussed in today's episode in the show notes or at optoutpod.com. Now get out there and opt out this week. This week's project to help you opt out is Teddit, a privacy-preserving front-end for Reddit that's free and open source. Teddit allows you to browse Reddit and follow subreddits and users via RSS, all while avoiding JavaScript, ads, and direct connections to Reddit servers. It's the default I try to use when sharing Reddit links, and I recommend you try it out by using my self-hosted public instance at teddit.sethforprivacy.com. You can also use the browser plugin Privacy Redirect to automatically redirect any Reddit links to a random or specified Teddit instance.